All right, I just want to make a really quick video for week 2 based on the reading that you did from Everything's an Argument, the structure of arguments. You guys, I responded to all of the people who had made a comment in the discussion thread within the time frame, and you all did a great job, I think, identifying that the chapter is really about the difference between artistic and inartistic proofs, and that's significant. I think that's great. It's not necessarily something that I had like really even thought about. I mean, they are explicit, and it's very clear that they are saying, oh, okay, there's these differences, and I think it's valuable as a reminder for you, because I brought it up in 102, that there is a significance between artistic and inartistic purposes, and it really grounds it. And I like what I wanted you guys to get out of or out of the reading here. And I asked you only to read a section, so you didn't have to read all of it. But like the hard evidence, that idea of inartistic proofs under the headings of like statistics, that you're thinking about what statistics you're using and how you're using the statistics, but also how your sources are using statistics. How are they, like, how are you reading the use of statistics in the sources you have? Do you feel like their reading of the statistics is fair? And I think that the way it's brought up in this text is really to get you thinking about, well, you have to, and some people pointed out, like the reading with a critical eye, you really do have to you cannot take the statistics for what they are. You have to read, you have to see how they're being interpreted, and do you agree with that interpretation? It might be kind of hard at this point, because maybe you don't have a lot of experience calling into question someone's reading of statistics. But one thing you might point out is, in your, like, when you're thinking about drafting your own and what statistics you might use, make sure that you're very clear that how the writer's interpretation of the statistics either matches with, or is going to be a critical point that you're going to bring up, that is going to provide an entrance into your argument, to say, well, the reading of this author's statistics is this way, but why are they reading them that way? The Asher had a good example when looking at the data, that it's like that's killer. They had this statistics example that's like looking at 42 years of data versus like 140 years or 147 years. Don't remember the exact time, but it's like, why? And Asher brought up the idea, well, why would you compare two very different numbers? But in doing so, it causes a great deal of confusion in this comparison when you're showing the different, and why, what the difference is there. So it's, well, you could say, well, do the statistics that you are seeing in your sources, do they present confusion? Are they being read in a way that fits into the argument, instead of being read in a way that is questioning the argument, right? A great example brought up in Everything's an Argument about the drinking during pregnancy. I mean, that was an astonishing example, where the data shows that, all these women are having children with birth defects because of their drinking, when in fact a large set, 60% of the women involved in the study were doing cocaine, right? And drinking, right? So it's like, well, was it the cocaine or was it the drinking? You can't parse those, right? That's like, okay. So that type of thing, like, do you feel like your sources are doing justice to statistics? And are there statistics which would really benefit your reading? They say, well, if I hold this statistic up and say, this is how this author is reading it, but if I look at it from my perspective, you could look at it differently. You could say, well, no, actually, that's not supporting what the author thinks it's supporting. And that's not you just being like obstinate, or like, thinking that you know more than the author does. It's you being a critical thinking human being and saying, well, I understand that you read it that way, but you could also read it this way. I mean, that's the value of education and academia, is that you can read, and that's pointed out, that you can read statistics differently depending on the argument you're trying to fit into. And that idea of thinking about testimonials and narratives, how are those working into the the hard evidence that you're using, and then from there the whole common sense, the artistic proofs, the ones in which you're building based on like precedent, or analogy, and that's significant. I think that for like I didn't put this in here, and in the figurative, in week one, you could have done this with the figurative language, but the idea, it's always beneficial to think about a solid analogy that you can make, right? The best way to ground your arguments with audiences is to provide them with a vivid analogy, right? And that the David Eggers example is so good, and I, it's really compelling, and so that's a great, and you can see the Eggers example also shows that analogy is not just like a one sentence thing. He goes through and explains the connections there. You could have analogies. You're introduced the idea, introduce your data, use your source, and then explain the source through an analogy, right? This is just as the same as this thing. If we look at these things as equal, how does that change the way in which we value them? And so that's really important to consider the analogies that you could bring to bear on your arguments. And so I really encourage you to spend some time, and I'm hoping that this thing gets you thinking about spending some time about some different ways in which you can use inartistic and artistic proofs in your own writing. And we'll come back and look at that a little bit more when we think about other forms of argument. And you already will be doing that in week 3 when you're trying to outline your own argument. And I hope that you're able to see some of the connections between these 2 weeks, and that there's some complementary development construction in the putting these 2 weeks together. All right. So I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.